I like the batleth. Okay. That's how they do it in the show, right? Yeah, I don't mind it. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Screen Tested. I am your host Tyrant. Now today we're going to be tackling the batleth, one of the most iconic pop culture weapons ever from the Star Trek franchise. Now as you guys know, I didn't really grow up with Star Trek. It wasn't really the one that resonated with me a lot, so I'm not the biggest Star Trek nerd. Live long and prosper. That's about as good as you're going to get from me. However, I really like the batleth. I've always liked it. I always thought it had not only a really cool sci-fi, inspired design, but I always thought that it was a complicated weapon. A lot of people have talked about it. I've even kind of touched on it in the past a little bit, but I wanted to do a full dedicated episode diving into the nitty-gritty. So there are a couple little things that we should mention before we get into the bulk of the testing in today's episode, especially the stuff that I read off the wiki. It is the Sword of Honor, right? That's what it's called. Now, obviously, there are a couple of different designs of the batleths, which would have similar dynamics, but perhaps different pros or cons. This is the one we're going with. Obviously, I would consider this one to be the most iconic, right? Now, there is a small gripe that I have with this particular one, and that is it's a little bit more flat, a little bit more straight than perhaps some of the other curved versions. I really like the ones that are a little bit more curved, but obviously, this is the best I could find. So this was what I'm going with in today's episode. I don't really think it's going to make too much of a difference to any of the results, but it is worth mentioning at the very least. Now, the reason why I think that the batleth is so complicated of a weapon is because there's a lot of nuance to it, right? A lot of people don't like nuance. They either like black or white. But the truth is, this is a weapon where I feel like there's going to be a lot of caveats and a lot of contextual information that will, determine whether it's good or bad in specific contexts or specific ways. We're going to try and delve into all of them and give some good arguments for both sides and kind of just come to a general understanding. So before we get into the testing, there are a couple of changes I need to make to the batleth. First and foremost, these handles are terrible. They are not real leather and they are very, very thin. It really hurts to hold the batleth as it currently stands. So I need to put on some actual real leather to fix them up. But the more pressing issue is none of the burrs have been removed from the manufacturing process, and the burrs are very sharp. Now, for anybody who's unclear, the burrs are just basically right angles left over from when you cut out the batleth, but they're not actually sharp edges used for cutting. They're a different type of edge. So we need to remove all of the burrs, especially in the handholds, because if I don't remove them and I slip when I'm trying to, transition to all the different, hand grips, there is a very, very real chance I will slice my fingers open. So I'm going to use a file and a belt sander to remove all those sharp edges before actually sharpening up the batleth. Then when we moved on to actually fixing up the grip, I put some epoxy on and then I double wrapped real leather thick strips, and hopefully this will give me enough thickness on the hands so that it doesn't hurt anymore. But with that out of the way, let's get to the B-roll and then to the testing. So this one is 5.1 pounds or 2.26 kilos, which is kind of heavy, and we'll go over some of the nuances of the weight, but I just wanted to mention this one weighs around 2.2 kilos, whereas the Canon version weighs over 5 kilos. The batleth. I know you guys have been waiting for this one for a while. I've been waiting for this one for a while, so let's get stuck in. First and foremost, we should talk about the weight. So like we said a little bit earlier, 2.2-ish kilos. That's kind of heavy for now I'm going to be careful how I say this, sword-like object. And what I mean by that is that you can use it like a sword. That sort of weight for something like this, it's not unheard of, right? The weight distribution of this thing is kind of strange, which means it might only be 2.2 kilos or whatever it is, but because of how it's all distributed on this thing, it can feel heavy in some places. Now, starting off, let's talk about why people analyze the batleth as a sword, because I know that's what people are going to instantly go to, right? When you look at any batleth video, people compare them to swords, regular swords. Now, I'm going to bring up why people do this, and I'm also going to bring up why it's important first and foremost. So if you look at this, it is around about the same size as a regular long sword. So why do people, when they immediately talk about the bat'leth, compare it to something like a sword? The reason why is reach. In any sort of combat or weapon scenario, reach is the most objective determining factor whether or not you win or lose. Like, people may not like that, but the truth is, if you have more reach than your opponent, the likelihood of you being able to win a battle or whatever it is a whole lot higher. So why do people analyze the bat'leth like a sword? It's really simple. If I hold it like a sword, I'm maximizing my reach. So instead of holding it like this, where my reach is only this, if I hold it like a sword, all of a sudden my reach is a lot further. That's why people analyze the bat'leth through the lens of a sword. Reach is the most important factor when it comes to a lot of weapons. So, now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about how I think you could use it. And while we're doing that, let's cut some things, because of course I'm gonna cut some things. All right, so how should I hold it? Should I hold my dominant hand on there? Or... We'll try that for starters. I have no idea how this is gonna go. So, before we get into that, it's sharpened from here to about here, and from here to about here. Now, the reason why I didn't sharpen any of this is because I actually want to keep this for my collection, and I want to be able to spar with it's not the right word, but I do want to maybe use it a little bit. We'll get to that a little bit later, but that's essentially why it's not sharpened, because if it's sharpened all the way down, it means the edge is going to be a lot more brittle, especially because this isn't heat treated. Anyways, that's f***ing cool, bro. I like the bat'leth. I f***ing like the bat'leth. And this is one of the things, is like, I don't know how scathing my critiques might be just yet, but even if they are scathing, I really like the bat'leth. So that one there is a good one, because you can still use it like a blade, right? And you get into this weird, it has a weird distribution on the weight, right? But it's not terrible. We hold it kind of like this. Problem is, we don't really have much reach. Like I mentioned earlier, that's why we try to extend our reach using it kind of like a sword. But the first big issue we have is the cutting surfaces. It's actually kind of hard, because like if you look here, I have to nail that area to actually be able to cut in here. Now, a forward-facing curve, we've tested them before on the channel. You can put a lot of force in them, right? The problem usually is thrusting. It's just generally speaking, it's gonna be a little bit harder to thrust. That was a super anime cut. Anyway, I really enjoyed that one. So we've already kind of covered why people analyze the bat'leth as a sword, and that is primarily just a range thing. You want more range. Range is the most objective thing in terms of winning a fight. Bows, arrows, guns, spears, swords, big swords, we've always tried to create as much space between us and our target to make sure that we don't get hurt. Range is super important. But using the bat'leth, I think, has a lot of use cases, but there's also some stuff here, right? First and foremost, I think that you would have to combine a lot of different sword styles and styles in general to actually use a bat'leth effectively. And what I mean by that is, let's just say a good starting position might be using the bat'leth kind of like a regular sword, right? But in a lot of cases, I think because we have this large curve, actually using it kind of like, let's say, maybe a saber, right? Using a lot of flick cuts, or maybe getting around people's guards, things like that, are actually really good use cases of these curves and the dynamics with it. The skill ceiling for something like this might be really, really high in terms of combining different weapons. But then what I come to is any of this better than a regular sword? So for example, I can present my blade out, I can protect my hands because I have hand protection, but on top of that, if I actually wanted to grapple and get in close, I can still do all of those things with a regular blade. So does the bat'leth kind of fill the need like, does it justify its existence, right? What does this do better than any of the other blades? Well, the one thing that I do kind of like is these big scoops here to kind of get into blades. Now, I don't think you're going to be able to bind too many blades, but I do think that they are definitely good for getting blades out of the way. So maybe, you know, kind of deflecting blades in here, yeah, I think that's perfectly valid and fine. The only issue I have is how difficult would it actually be to catch blades in there? And that's why I think cutting with one of these is interesting, because I kind of have to sweet spot it, right? If I cut too low down, I might catch this other blade here. And so I've got to hit it right just on that edge right there. And this is kind of like the same thing with the LETH bow, right? You kind of got to sweet spot it. So it's just a little bit interesting in terms of its dynamic. If you're enjoying today's episode, and I sincerely hope you are, perhaps today you'll consider supporting the channel. Ad revenue does not cover the costs for these sorts of projects. This content is pretty expensive. The batleth itself costs like couple $100, and that's just 1 week's worth of content. So if you want to support, there'll be links down below to my Patreon and YouTube memberships. I do try to give back and create, you know, behind the scenes content, sneak peeks, vlogs, that sort of stuff, because this content is very expensive and ad revenue just doesn't cover it. So if you're enjoying, maybe today you'll consider supporting. I would really appreciate it, and thank you to everybody who's already supporting. Without you guys, none of this would be possible. All right, let's get back to the episode. Okay, we have another one of our favorite, whatever this thing is, whatever you call it, don't care. We're going to be hitting one of these because it's a little bit more dense, a little bit more fibrous, so that should be fun. But before we get there, let's circle back to the discussion that I was having. And that is how you would use this thing. Like I said, I think you're going to be combining different types of sword styles all together to use it not only at range, but also up close. I do think that using this up close as a short range weapon, for example, in enclosed environments, I think it's perfectly fine, right? Come over to Tony. These sorts of things, these sorts of hooks in these shots here are absolutely devastating. So up close and personal, it'll be pretty good. And don't worry, we'll hit Tony in a minute. But before we do that, we're still getting through the cutting. I do think I don't mind the middle handle. Now, the reason why is trying to fit both my hands in one to maximize my reach even more is really difficult. So using the middle one, you're kind of lessening that reach, but at the same time, it's better than not having it there at all. I do think having this cut out down here all the way along would just be better. Now, I do know that there are other batleth designs. Like I said earlier, this is just the design I've got, but there are other designs, and I think one of those designs does have a large cutout here, so I could slide my hand all the way up and down, which I think would be just objectively better. One hit, should we just do one hit on it? There's a large cut right down the center. I'll do another one. Just like that. I can't help but kind of think back to the double-bladed sword, right? This feels like the double-bladed sword, that it does have more protection. Even though I can't slide up and down it, which would be better, it does have some sort of protection where I can actually protect my hands, which the double-bladed sword didn't have at all. So that is a point in this fable. Oh, got that last bit of rubbish. Oh, would you look at that? It says subscribe. Hey, while we're at it, why don't you guys subscribe if you're not already? I mean, that was a total coincidence that was not planned at all. Who would have thought? We have enough range to get over, let's say, like a shoulder before we actually start running into issues here. So that is some good reach, some good hit. But the big problem is thrusts are more deadly than chops. Chops can be deadly, obviously, but relatively speaking, in a generalized statement, thrusts, things going through your body, are deadly. They're more deadly than chops. This is a complete chop-centric, slash-centric weapon. And the biggest thing you need to remember, and this is something that I don't really speak about that often, but I really am going to start doing it because a lot of people, I think, misunderstand some things, is your opponents are not NPCs. A lot of people say, no, you just got to do this one thing in this one way and then it'll be fine. It's like other people move at their own pace. In combat, when you're fighting, sparring, dueling, whatever it is, people move when they want to. People don't stand still for you to hit them. They don't let you hit them. They guard, they attack, you have to defend, you have to attack. It's like a game of chess, just at light speed. People are not NPCs, so when you say, oh, you just need to use it this way, it's like there are a lot of ways to counter what you've just said that are a lot easier. Oh, that was a good one. That was a good one. Okay. It can thrust in there, no worries. Secondary edge. But I was able to get the primary edge to thrust in. So that's a good thing, that's very good. Now we should talk a little bit about the risks involved in using something like this, obviously. Because how I think you would use it, right? Extend your range. Use it like a blade if you want, if you can, right? But then when you get up close and personal to your target, then you can grapple with it, right? Then you can use all of these sort of advantages, because these are advantages in this particular context. The problem is going from the threat zone of the range into the close range is difficult. That's really hard to do. Let's try this a little bit with an actual blade, right? This is a blunt blade, but just because I want to kind of get used to the dynamics of maybe we're getting some blades in there or not. Again. Try and pull that. Yeah, you can get that out. It's kind of a little bit of a trade-off in some areas. You get you're worse at range, you're better in closer grappling situations, but it's just getting to those grappling situations is going to be really difficult because you have to get past your enemy's danger zone. So the Batleth, an absolutely awesome and cool weapon. I think it's groovy. That's immediately what comes to mind when I think of the Batleth. A groovy weapon. But is it a good weapon? Well, let's discuss. There's a lot here, there's a lot of context. First off is obviously, I think there's a high skill ceiling to use this. To be actually use this weapon effectively, you need to know how to use multiple other weapons proficiently, then you can apply it to this weapon, and then you can kind of make this weapon work. I feel like that's the context behind this. There's also some other context that we should address, and that is obviously this is more of a dueling weapon, right? You know, the Klingons do like gladiatorial bouts with it, and I think for that purpose, it's perfect, right? Like you've got the same detriments, you've got the same positives, so they kind of cancel each other out. Super entertaining, super awesome. There's also some other stuff that we'll get to a little bit later, what I think is the best use case for it. But with all that being said, it is time to get to Tyrant's initial thoughts, score, or TITS for short. So starting off with comfort. All right, comfort in use wasn't terrible. However, comfort of the actual Batleth itself, this is a very thin piece of steel, right? You know, you look at this, it's rather thin, even with bits of foam on each handle, then double wrapped in leather. It still is quite harsh on the hands. That's why I kind of wanted to wear gloves while I was using it no matter what, because using it on bare hands, it's really not that comfortable. On top of that, even though when I first got it, you guys saw, I had to take off all the burrs because they were so sharp. I was really concerned that if I tried to move my hands and transition them to different holes, I was gonna slice my fucking fingers off. So even with taking off all the burrs, they are still very harsh on the fingers, all these the little burrs around the edges of the hand holes. So comfort is not the best. You could fix a lot of these issues by simply removing out that center portion and then making it so your hand can slide all the way down uninterrupted. So for comfort, I'm gonna go with something like a 6 for comfort. I don't think I could go any higher than that. It's usable, but there is definitely some work that can be done. Next up, let's go with design. I like the design for the most part. Like I said, with comfort, I think making the hand holes one continuous piece would be better, just more useful and more versatile. But this specific design, because I know there are other Batleth designs, on this specific design, you do have the little bits in the middle. I think making this point a little longer and making it so you can thrust with it a bit better would be just better overall, on top of making this point here a little bit shorter, just so we have more room on it. So with those couple of design cues in mind, I reckon this one for design is probably around a 7. I think that's fair, I think that's reasonable. I don't mind that at all. Next up, let's get to wieldability. This one's complicated, man. It really is. Because like I said, you need to be proficient at a bunch of other different weapons, so then you can apply them all kind of mishmash into this one weapon. I'll give it a 7. I'll give it a 7 for wieldability, but that's like the highest I can go, especially since the hand holes also make it really hard for the transitioning and things like that. But wieldability, you can make it work. Use your range, use that as your reach, and then when you get close enough, you get past their guard or whatever, then you can use it in up close and personal for the grappling aspect. And then lastly, effectiveness. It's pretty f***ing effective. It is, but there are some issues. And like I said, actually using the main cutting surfaces, because if I'm striking here, right, I don't actually have that much mass and leverage behind it because it's kind of close to my hands. This isn't really the best point to be hitting things with. But actually cutting with this surface in here, it's actually kind of hard to get to because you don't really have that much surface before you hit this point here. So you kind of have to sweet spot it, which can be difficult. It's really not the best at thrusting. It can kind of thrust, especially on the forward point, but coming up with the second one was kind of difficult to thrust with, at least in my experience. Apart from that though, it is pretty gnarly. 7 for effectiveness. I'm fine with that. I think that's reasonable. So that gives us a final score of 27 out of 40. That's not bad. Over halfway, I think that's reasonable. Obviously, I'm going with this design here. There are some other designs, like I said earlier. But I think the biggest takeaway is that you can use it. There are use cases, and specifically my favorite use case, what I think this would be absolutely awesome for, would be home defense. Using this in a home environment where you've got lots of walkways and corridors, that sort of stuff, you can use your reach, but at the same time, you can easily switch up and use those grappling options, which is really good, especially against something like a home intruder who's probably, if we're not talking about America with all the guns, in other parts of the world, if they have something like a baseball bat, this against a baseball bat would fucking sweep. This thing would be a monster against a baseball bat. So I think for home defense, this one is particularly actually really good. I like it for that. Obviously, like I said, the context is more of a dueling weapon. So take that into consideration when you're analyzing these sorts of things. But I think that's all for the batleth. I really like it. I really dig it. It was really fun. I'm really happy to have it in my collection. So with all that being said, remember to like today's video if you haven't already, subscribe if you're not subscribed. And as always, I'll see you next week in another episode. Have a good one.